This week on the agenda, one show, three presidents. How Costa Rica, Ecuador and East Timor feel China is helping forge their futures. As China throws its doors open wider post-COVID, developing countries from around the world are looking to reap the benefits. One such country is Costa Rica, which was one of the first Latin American nations to sign up to China's Belt and Road Initiative. I spoke to the country's president, Rodrigo Chavez Robles, to see why he was so keen to forge closer ties with Beijing. Mr. President, absolute pleasure to sit down with you. Let's talk about Costa Rica as an investment destination there, because it was one of the first countries in South America to sign up to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is going to mark its 10th anniversary this year. So what's your take on how that initiative has developed and where it is now? Because some say it's been maybe an exploitation of South America, or do you see it as only a good thing?
Costa Rica doesn't have a lot of investment from the Belt and Road. As a matter of fact, we do have a road under construction. It's about 80 kilometers, and we are expecting, there has been a lot of delay. We are expecting to complete it within this year. However, not only were we the first or one of the first countries in Latin America to sign with China the Belt and Road, we have free trade agreements with the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We have free trade agreements with the European Union, free trade agreement with China. Costa Rica is a very open country. We like to bring the world to Costa Rica and Costa Rica to the world. So that's one of the things we have been saying in Davos.
So do you see yourselves as rather a beacon of cooperation, which is one of the messages here at Davos, that everyone should be taking more concerted collective action?
Costa Rica has done its part. We are a tiny country, 57,000 square kilometers, 5.2 million people. However, we are the only country that has reversed tropical deforestation. But not only we stop it, we went from 24% to forest coverage in the 90s, 80s, and we are at more than 55, more than forest coverage. 25% of our area is protected on land, and we have one of the largest, relative to the size of the country, protection program of the oceans. So we are doing our generation matrix of electricity is 100% for practical purpose sustainable. So we have been doing our part. Hopefully the rest of the world will do it in environment, in human rights, and in freedoms as we are doing.
You brought up electricity, so let's talk about that now, because you've said that Costa Rica over-invested in electricity generation, was too reliant on fossil fuels, and that the rivers were too polluted. I mean, then you'd only been in office for about 15 days, I think. So now you're more embedded. You know, what's your take?
No, I didn't say we are too reliant on fossil fuels for electricity. What I said is that the country over-invested in generation capacity. And that's why we have been, in only 8 months of my administration, been able to drop electricity prices by about 30%. Why? Because we opened the market and we are exporting electricity. Before we had too much capacity to generate and we were not exporting electricity. We do have a problem with the management of solid waste. As a matter of fact, one of the meetings that I will have today here in Davos is with a large group that wants to convert solid waste into energy, and that would help us. The management of solid waste is causing trouble in our river basins, and we do need to work investing more in water treatment, sewage treatment centers. But those are challenges that are remaining, but we have done very well environmentally.
So you're having lots of climate-related conversations, but I do want to go back to trade, because Costa Rica is China's second and biggest trading partner, and you export more than 200 kinds of goods to China. So how do you see development between the two nations going? Will China reopening its economy make a big impact on you?
We do have comparatively large trade with China. We import more from them than we export to them. It's a substantial deficit. We think that what matters in the world is that all engines of growth are functioning. And which are the big centers of economic sort of gravitational force? The US, Europe, and China. So the fact that China hopefully will reopen, hopefully will go back to high rates of growth is going to help everybody in the world, especially if those big economic centers collaborate. And we know what is happening with Russia, Ukraine, and the sort of friction that China, the US, and the EU are having in that sense. So Costa Rica, as a small country, is calling for everybody to do their part.
You've mentioned all those geopolitical risks. There are some socio-economic risks too, that the cost of living crisis and putting pressure on communities all around the world. How is Costa Rica coping with that?
Costa Rica is suffering inflation as most countries. We had an inflation rate this year of about, well, it's about to be formally announced, but my estimation is going to be about 8.3%. Is high, but certainly not at the levels that we have seen in other OECD countries, and certainly not at the levels of Argentina, Turkey, and the like. So we have been giving cash transfers to the poorest households to compensate the price increases on food especially. So that's the way we're helping the most disadvantaged in society. At the same time, oil prices and gasoline prices have been dropping substantially. Electricity prices, in contrast to Europe, in Costa Rica, as I mentioned a minute ago, have dropped about 30% in the last 8 months. That's very good for us.
Some of the influencers who I've been speaking to here say we've got to stop trying to put band-aids on the problem. Do you worry that some of the measures that communities are taking and countries are taking to address short-term issues aren't going to last and create that longer-term growth, sustainability and green transition?
Look, the green transition has to happen. It's a necessity. It is easy to postpone when you have short planning horizons for governments, elections in short periods of time, that changes incentives. And yes, there is a risk at the moment that political urgency may turn into short-term measures that would only worsen the future situation. Particularly worrisome is the fact that some governments are trying to subsidize short-term consumption of fuels, as you correctly point out, Juliet. So the idea would be to reduce consumption now that the prices are high. People tend to substitute. That creates opportunity to invest in other sources of energy that are more sustainable. And I think it's a difficult task, but it's a necessary task to undertake, as we are doing in Costa Rica.
It's a big task, a necessary task, but a big task. And I'm thinking of Costa Rica as a real pioneer of ecotourism. It's a haven for ecotourism. So, yes, of course, there can always be more things done to limit the impacts of climate change. How can you get a larger leverage, if you like, with the countries that can make a bigger impact to address the problems?
We do have a great ecotourism industry. Actually, the experience, and I'm talking to your audience now, that you will have in Costa Rica, the enormous diversity of climates, landscapes, mountains, beaches. This is a commercial paid advertisement almost. You will not find anywhere in the world with, at the same time, the safety, the good logistics for tourism. That said, we have a moral voice that is bigger than our size. Why? Costa Rica is a country that abolished the army more than 70 years ago. We have lived by law and not by weapons. We don't have tanks. We don't have fighter airplanes. We have invested in people, in education, and in health, human capital. That we can say. We have been at peace. We have almost uninterrupted 200 years of democracy, all freedoms and equality for all groups, all minorities in our country. We have parity of gender in Congress by law, and parity of gender in my cabinet by choice. So Juliet, if that small country in the middle of a rough area of the world historically was able to do it, what you said, the big boys and girls in the world should be able to do it. So we speak with example, not with demagoguery.
All right, I want to book my ticket. I'm on my way.
Please come, you will be our dear guest.
President, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Another Latin American nation looking to China is Ecuador. Earlier this year, after months of negotiations, the two countries signed a wide-ranging and historic free trade agreement. I asked President Guillermo Lasso just what the deal will mean for his people. Welcome, first of all, and thank you very much for speaking to CGTN. The theme of the WEF Summit is cooperation in a fragmented world. How important is that for Ecuador and why?
En primer lugar, muchas gracias por esta entrevista. Es muy importante para el Ecuador, dentro de nuestra política de más Ecuador en el mundo y más mundo en el Ecuador. Esto lo que implica es Ecuador en el mundo buscando tratados de libre comercio para poder ampliar los mercados para nuestros productos. Y más mundo en Ecuador lo que implica es más inversiones del mundo, más empresas extranjeras del mundo en el Ecuador, lo que implica también empleo en nuestro país.
Now, already in 2023, Ecuador has signed a trade deal with China after months of negotiations. Can you tell us any more details about that and how important it was to get over the line?
Hemos terminado el borrador técnico. Lo que queda ahora es redactar los documentos legales y posteriormente la firma del tratado. Esto es muy importante para Ecuador, porque un mercado como la China es una gran oportunidad para ingresar con productos como el banano, el camarón, el café, el cacao, la pitahaya y otros. Y eso, como lo decía hace un momento, significa más empleo en el Ecuador y más oportunidades para los empresarios ecuatorianos.
China's Belt and Road Initiative marks its 10th anniversary this year. Ecuador has been involved for many years. How has it changed your relationship with China?
La relación con China es una relación tradicionalmente óptima y durante mi mandato la China ha cooperado con el Ecuador con el 53% de las vacunas que requerimos para el proceso de vacunación. Hemos renegociado la deuda china en términos favorables al Ecuador, generándole una disponibilidad de flujo de caja de 1.400 millones de dólares. Y también China comprendió la necesidad de renegociar los acuerdos petroleros que garantizan los créditos chinos y esto implica una liberación de una gran cantidad de petróleo que podemos ahora exportar y cuyo dinero sirve para llevar a cabo proyectos sociales.
What does China's deal mean for Ecuador's relationships with the rest of the Americas? I'm thinking particularly about the United States.
Nuestra relación con Estados Unidos también es una relación de gran acercamiento desde hace muchos años. Por lo tanto, nuestra relación con China no tiene por qué afectar nuestra relación de Estados Unidos. Ellos saben que estamos negociando con la China y pues no tiene por qué cambiar. Ahora, respecto de otros países en América Latina, Ecuador ha tenido la intención de incorporarse a la Alianza del Pacífico. No lo hemos podido hacer porque no hemos logrado un acuerdo con México para cerrar un tratado de libre comercio con ellos, que es una condición fundamental para el ingreso a la Alianza del Pacífico. Pero bueno, como no vamos a poder entrar por ahora a la Alianza del Pacífico, hemos ido directo a la China. Hemos avanzado mucho en el Tratado de Libre Comercio con Corea del Sur y desarrollaremos también acuerdos comerciales como con Costa Rica, con Panamá, con República Dominicana, buscaremos un acuerdo comercial con Japón, también con Canadá, porque tenemos un objetivo muy claro. En el mundo está la gran oportunidad para Ecuador.
Let's talk about the green transition, because energy is a really big theme for the world at the moment, and especially that transition to green energy. And in terms of what's important to Ecuador's economy, how are you approaching that move away from hydrocarbons?
El Ecuador produce al año 5.200 kilowatts de energía. De esos 5.200, más del 90% es energía limpia, es decir, proyectos hidroeléctricos que generan energía para consumo del Ecuador. Y tenemos en carpeta proyectos que nos pueden permitir duplicar la producción de energía limpia, hidroeléctrica, fotovoltaica, eólica. Por lo tanto, el Ecuador ya está contribuyendo con esta transición energética en el mundo, dado que su producción de energía es fundamentalmente energía limpia.
President Lasso, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda, East Timor's president explains why trade with China is so crucial to his country.
As China embarks on a new journey of modernization, the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the top political advisory body, convene their annual sessions in early March. Join us on CGTN for our special coverage of the two sessions. Find out the course China will take to ensure a sustainable future for its 1.4 billion people, and how China's decisions will impact global economic recovery. Agenda for 1.4 billion on CGTN.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to The Agenda. It's been 20 years since East Timor gained independence from Indonesia, but high unemployment and poverty still plague the country. So what's the way forward? The country's president, José Ramos Horta, explained why China is so important to his nation's future. The theme of this conference here in Davos is cooperation in a fragmented world. What cooperation does East Timor need?
Well, particularly our absolute major concern is the impact of COVID, the impact of the war in Ukraine on the global economy, supply chain, food chain, that impacting particularly on the more vulnerable people in our own country, in the world. And how can the international community come together, governments, private sector, to have a common agenda, a common strategy to address some of these very critical, urgent issues. And that is the increase of child poverty, increase of poverty in general, because all of these then has other consequences. Political instability, violence in many countries. So we have to address these together because it's in everybody's interest. It's a moral, ethical issue, but also an issue of our national selfish interests to tackle these together.
In terms of your national selfish interest then, what's top of the list of the things that you're hoping to get moving on?
Well, obviously in terms of our strategy for the next few years is to bring in foreign direct investment, whether in tourism, in the oil and gas industries, in supporting our infrastructure development like a new airport and the agricultural sector. We want to achieve absolute food security, self-sufficiency.
So you've got a long list, but someone you are cooperating with already is China, especially through the Belt and Road Initiative. And you mentioned infrastructure there. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative reaches its 10th anniversary in 2023. So tell us more about how that's working for East Timor.
Well, China is an indispensable partner. And I personally do not agree at all with a lot of China bashing going on in the United States, in Europe, in Australia. Well, we have to understand China's history. China went through generations of poverty, of humiliation, and then emerged through their own absolute willpower and strong leadership to be number 2 global economy. And they have done their best to contribute in their own selfish interest. Obviously, no one, if China is not a gigantic philanthropy, China is a country with its interests, and in that context, they have helped tremendously throughout Africa, Latin America, Asia.
And East Timor.
And East Timor. We have a very good relationship with China going back when we were extremely poor, and even when we were poor, we supported the one China policy. We didn't go into the checkbook diplomacy. We didn't ask China for anything in return. So we have very good partnership with China. We have zero loan from China, so we don't have any debt with China. And our debt is minor compared to our GDP. It's primarily with ADB, Asian Development, and IFC. China has been very much a real generous in supporting us without any conditions.
So what are the opportunities you see for further cooperation between East Timor and China? You know, what projects are already underway and what's coming up in the future?
I would like to see far greater Chinese support to us in the agriculture sector, across the board in the agriculture sector, in our small scale industries of food processing. I want to see more China's involvement in our infrastructure development, in roads, bridges, airports, in the health system, like helping us build more modern hospitals. All of this China can do. We are relatively small, only 1.5 million. We have our own resources. We are not poverty stricken. We have oil, gas. We have billions of dollars in our sovereign fund. Recently, we inaugurated the biggest project in Timor, a new port, modern, automated port. China Harbor, a big Chinese company, they were the builders. It was not Chinese grant or Chinese loan. It was a public-private partnership initiative that involved our government, IFC, World Bank, and the French giant company called Bolloré. But then we contracted China Harbor to build the port. Totally automated, one of the most modern in Southeast Asia now. So that's in partnership with China Harbor. But I repeat, not loan, not grant from China. So we work as equal partners.
I know you're keen for more investment in agriculture to ensure food security, but your economy is very heavily dependent on oil and gas. So what are you doing to move towards that green transition? What do you need to get to that carbon-friendly future?
Only with the development with our existing potential oil and gas resources, we can then, 20 years from now, be able to declare that we are 100% in green economy. For those who talk about no more new oil and gas explorations, I would tell them, please tell it to the Americans, tell it to the Europeans, tell it to Saudi Arabia, to Venezuela, not us, because we are very new in oil and gas. And our contribution to CO2 emission is 0.0000, endless zeros. So we are going to develop our Timor Sea wealth, which plenty of gas. This year we are signing agreements to bring pipeline from the Timor Sea to East Timor to develop our gas industry, which we need. It's our lifeline.
So it's your lifeline, so you're going to continue in that field, and your green transition is almost as long as your country's been around.
Yes, exactly, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because you are a very young country. You're also one of the world's poorest countries.
Yeah.
Are you worried that this global battle for poverty reduction has maybe lost momentum amid the cost of living crisis, amid the pandemic, amid all the geopolitical tensions that we have?
It is a tragedy, and no one to blame. The global pandemic, COVID-19, and then as if that was enough as a tragedy for humanity, we have the war in Ukraine with all its impact on the global economy. So it is a catastrophe for everybody. In the midst of it, the UN is very much weakened, fractured, because of the permanent members of the Security Council do not see eye to eye. Their own selfish interests, their own perception of each other, their own suspicion of each other, block, really defeat the multilateralism, defeat international partnership. So here in Davos, we try to see whether governments working with private sector, working with the people who own trillions and trillions of dollars. 5% of the world, they own 95% of the wealth. Whether these 5% who own most of the world's wealth can contribute more to eliminate extreme poverty in the world.
President Horta, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up soon here on The Agenda, Youth Speaks. We talk to young entrepreneurs determined to save the planet. But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all of The Agenda team here in London, goodbye.